They said the court of Valoran was eternal, its lords, its bloodlines, its hunger. Only I seemed to wither with time. That morning, when the royal healer lowered his eyes and whispered, "There will be no child," I already knew. I had known for months. Every moon had passed in silence, and my body had become an empty chapel where no prayer was answered. But hearing it aloud, hearing it declared by one of them made the truth colder, sharper, like the edge of a silver blade pressed to my skin. I thanked him with a nod. That was what a queen should do. Suffer beautifully, never loudly. He bowed low, as if in mourning, and I dismissed him before the first tear could betray me. When I left the chamber, the corridors of the Crimson Court seemed longer than before. My slippers whispered over marbles streaked with veins of red, and the painted windows bled light onto the floor. Everywhere, servants paused mid-step. They knew already. News traveled fast in a castle where no one slept, and nothing truly died. By the time I reached the grand hall, I could feel their eyes. Immortal eyes, sharp, curious, cruel. Conversations dulled as I passed, like candles snuffed by invisible fingers. "The mortal queen," they murmured. "Her blood is warm, but her womb is cold." My crown felt heavier with every whisper. The rubies pressed against my temples like drops of blood congealed into metal. I wanted to rip it off, to fling it into the firelight that danced above the banquet tables, but I kept walking. Spine straight, face calm. If they would call me barren, I would at least be regal in my emptiness. At the far end of the hall sat Lucien, the vampire king, my husband, my salvation, my undoing. He was carved from moonlight and shadow, golden hair falling in loose waves against his dark attire. When he looked at me, the world usually stilled, but today his gaze slid past me, toward the goblet in his hand, as though the wine inside it demanded more attention than his living wife. That small act, the absence of a glance, hurt more than any rumor. I took my seat beside him, the silence between us louder than the music that followed. His courtiers toasted to eternity, their laughter bright and brittle. I sipped my wine to keep my hands from trembling. Across the table, Lady Vera leaned close to a nobleman and whispered something behind her fan. Her eyes, black and gleaming, flicked toward me for half a heartbeat. Then she smiled, baring the tips of her fangs. They were already choosing my replacement. Dinner passed in a haze of polite cruelty. I spoke when spoken to, smiled when expected, and died quietly behind my eyes. When the courtiers rose to dance, I excused myself. Lucien did not stop me. He never did when pain hollowed me out. Perhaps that was mercy. Perhaps it was cowardice. My chambers were silent when I entered. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows over the carved wooden cradle near the window. The one I had commissioned months ago when hope had been enough to keep me alive. Pale silk drapes hung above it, embroidered with tiny stars. My fingers traced the fabric absently. I had imagined the sound of a baby breathing beneath it. I had imagined small hands reaching for mine. But all I had now was silence. I knelt beside the hearth, fed it with torn letters, old prayers, and the soft linen gown I had stitched for a child who would never wear it. The flames licked greedily, curling threads into black smoke. Finally, I lifted the cradle's silk covering and set it gently atop the fire. The fabric caught instantly, glowing gold, then crimson, before collapsing into ash. For a long moment, I watched it burn. I didn't cry. The grief had passed somewhere beyond tears into something harder, colder, almost clean. Behind me, the moonlight spilled through the high windows, pale and indifferent. I thought of Lucien standing in his throne room, a king surrounded by immortals who could never understand the cruelty of ending. To them, loss was temporary, reversible, something that could be resurrected with blood. To me, loss was real, flesh, final. When the last thread turned to embers, I rose and whispered to the empty room, "So be it." The scent of smoke clung to my hair, to my gown, to my skin. I hoped it would follow me into court the next morning, so when they whispered useless mortal blood, they would also smell the fire. That night, I stood by the window, staring at the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond the mountains, my husband hunted under the stars, feeding to forget. And here I was, feeding the flames with everything I had ever hoped for. They said the court of Valoran was eternal. Perhaps it was. But as I watched the last spark fade to black, I made a quiet vow to myself. If eternity would not give me a child, then I would give eternity a reason to remember my name. The throne hall of Valoran was a cathedral of shadows and moonlight. At night, when the stained glass, moons blazed from above, every color of blood shimmered on the marble floor, scarlet, amethyst, silver blue. The nobles gathered beneath those fractured lights like jeweled specters, their voices hushed yet sharp enough to cut. It was nearly midnight when I was summoned. The messenger's pale hand trembled as he delivered the command. His Majesty calls the council. I knew before stepping through those heavy doors what they would discuss. The kingdom had waited long enough for an heir, and patience was not a virtue immortals were known to possess. When I entered, the hall fell silent. The nobles rose not out of respect, but curiosity. Their eyes gleamed like polished coins, each reflecting the same question. Would the king finally cast off his barren queen? Lucian sat upon his throne, carved from obsidian and bone, his golden hair gleaming faintly against the gloom. His expression was unreadable, the perfect mask of an ancient ruler. But I knew that stillness. It was the stillness he wore before battle. Speak, he commanded softly, and the first noble stepped forward. Your Majesty, said Lord Varen, bowing low, it is no secret the realm demands continuity. The court suffers uncertainty. Perhaps it is time to consider another consort. The words struck like a blade. I stood at the edge of the dais, my hands folded so tightly my knuckles whitened. Another voice joined him, a woman's smooth as silk and twice as cutting. The mortal blood has served its purpose, my king, Lady Vera purred, her crimson gown gliding as she moved. But it cannot quicken your lineage. Choose one of us. The throne deserves an immortal heir. Her words echoed through the chamber, feeding on silence. I waited for Lucian to speak, to defend me, to remind them that I was still his queen by choice, not obligation. But he only stared at the goblet in his hand, swirling the dark wine as if searching for answers in its depths. Finally, his voice came low, deliberate. My word on this matter remains unchanged. The council stirred uneasily. I have taken one wife, he continued, and I will take no other. Speak of this again, and you will find yourselves speechless for eternity. The threat hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. No one dared move. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt the weight of his gaze, or rather, the absence of it. He had spoken in my defense without once looking at me. His words were steel, but his eyes refused to meet mine. The council dissolved in uneasy murmurs. One by one, the nobles bowed and retreated into the shadows, their faces pale with resentment. Lady Vera was the last to leave, pausing at the doorway to offer me a smile so sweet it stung. You have his word, my queen, she said softly, but words can fade faster than love. When the hall finally emptied, Lucian remained seated. I approached, the echo of my steps breaking the silence between us. You shouldn't have needed to threaten them, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Your will alone should have been enough. He leaned back against the throne, exhaustion flickering behind his poise. Immortals are slow to remember humility. And you? I asked before I could stop myself. Have you remembered love? That drew his eyes, those impossible eyes, the color of dying fire. For an instant, something raw and ancient burned there. Then it vanished. He rose smoothly, towering, immaculate. Go to your chambers, Seraphine, he said, not unkindly but distant, as if speaking to a ghost. You need rest. And you need honesty, I whispered, though he was already turning away. He did not answer. He never did when I was right. By the time I reached the doorway, I heard the scrape of the throne as he descended from it. I turned back. Lucian stood before the great stained glass window of the twin moons, his figure haloed in violet light. He pressed a hand to the cold glass, the gesture so human it made my heart ache. Why do you look at the moons as if they could forgive you? I asked. His voice was barely a murmur. Because they remember what we forget. I didn't understand then. I would later. I did not sleep that night. From my balcony, I saw him ride into the mist before dawn, his cloak trailing like a wound across the snow. The guards whispered that the king had gone to the catacombs, to the resting place of the first blood-bonded kings, where no mortal was allowed to tread. I watched until the darkness swallowed him, until the last echo of his horse's hooves faded beneath the cliffs. He had defended me before the court, but left me in silence afterward. I told myself it was politics, duty, pride. But in the hollow of my chest, I knew better. He wasn't avoiding me because he no longer loved me. He was avoiding me because he did, and whatever secret he sought in those catacombs, whatever sin he was preparing to commit, he meant to do it for me. I had grown accustomed to the stillness of the castle, the way silence wrapped around every corridor like mourning cloth. But that night, something in the air shifted. The silence wasn't still anymore. It listened. Sleep had evaded me since the council. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lucien's back turned beneath the moonlight. His hand pressed to the stained glass as if pleading with ghosts. By the third night, the ache inside me had become unbearable, so I wrapped my cloak tighter and walked anywhere the shadows might hide my unrest. That was how I found the inner courtyard, the one the servants whispered about but never entered. Its gates had been sealed since long before my time. I pushed them open and felt a gust of air so cold it stole my breath. No moonlight touched this place. The walls rose high, ivy-choked and crumbling, their stones slick with the memory of rain. And there, in the center, I saw it a rose bush, skeletal and pale. Its branches were heavy with thorns, each one glinting faintly in the faint silver light. At first I thought it was dead, but as I knelt closer, I saw something that stilled my heart. From a cut on one stem seeped not dew, but blood thick and dark, glistening red against the white petals. It bled slowly, rhythmically, as though it had a heartbeat. I reached out before reason could stop me. My fingertips brushed a petal, soft as silk, yet strangely warm. A drop of the crimson sap clung to my skin. It shimmered briefly, then sank into my flesh as if absorbed. The sting was sharp, electric, like touching a brand. I drew my hand back with a gasp. Curious thing, isn't it? The voice came from behind me, low, ancient, threaded with the weight of centuries. I turned, startled. A figure in a dark cloak stood among the ivy, motionless. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't even felt his presence until he spoke. The air itself seemed to bow around him. "Who are you?" I asked, rising to my feet. He lifted his hood, just enough for me to see the outline of a face. Ageless, beautiful, terrible. His eyes glowed faintly, not red like most vampires, but pale gold, like candles burning through smoke. "Names are heavy things," he murmured. "But once, they called me Iron." The name brushed against my memory like a half-remembered prayer. The royal chroniclers spoke of an Iron of the first blood, a seer who had vanished before the founding of the court. He should have been nothing but legend. This place, I began, my voice small against the dark. Why does it feel alive? He smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it, because it was born of sacrifice. This garden was once tended by queens who prayed for life and gave it instead. I frowned. Life and gave it instead? He stepped closer, the sound of his robes whispering like dry leaves. A paradox the mortal mind struggles to hold. You came here seeking comfort from your barrenness, did you not? The words cut deeper than I expected. You speak as if it were sin. No, Iron said softly. As destiny. He gestured toward the bleeding rose. The barren womb hides not emptiness, but destiny's seed if the king dares to share his curse. I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or weep. You speak in riddles. Truth often is one, he replied. The curse your husband carries is ancient, passed from the first kings who sought eternity through blood. He keeps it sealed within himself for now. I took a step closer, despite the chill rising around us. What curse? The binding, Iron said simply. A ritual older than your gods, forged before dawn learned to chase the dark. When two souls are joined by blood under that rite, they cease to be separate. They live as one, or die as one. Eternity shared, yet never free. I felt the world tilt. The bleeding rose, the king's silence, the catacombs, it all began to weave into something I could almost understand. And you're saying this? Binding could give me life? A child? He shook his head. No, my queen. It gives you creation, but not as mortals know it. What you make from it will not be born of flesh. It will be born of fire, of spirit, of legacy. But to grasp that, you must be willing to bleed beyond forgiveness. The words chilled me. Bleed beyond forgiveness. He nodded once. There are kinds of motherhood that do not cradle infants, Seraphine de Lior. You may yet bear something eternal. The wind stirred then, carrying the faint scent of ash and roses. When I blinked, he was gone. Only the dying bush remained, its crimson sap pooling at my feet like a promise written in blood. I stood there for a long time, staring at the rose, at the small cut it had left on my hand. The wound no longer hurt. It pulsed faintly instead, in rhythm with my heartbeat, as if something unseen had already taken root beneath my skin. The moon never touched that garden, yet I felt its cold light all the same. It was as if the heavens themselves watched, holding their breath. I pressed my hand to the bleeding rose one final time and whispered into the darkness, "If destiny demands blood, then perhaps I have enough left to give." And in that moment, the wind sighed through the courtyard like a voice too ancient to belong to me. It was just past midnight when Lucien came to me. I had been sitting by the hearth, half asleep in the chair he'd carved for me years ago, when the air shifted the way it does when night itself holds its breath. The candles guttered. The flames bent toward the doorway. And then he was there, cloaked in black, his hair still damp from rain. He did not wear his crown. That frightened me more than if he had. He looked less like a king, and more like a confession. "I knocked," he said softly, though we both knew he hadn't. "You never need to," I whispered, rising to my feet. "This is your castle." His eyes flickered toward the fire. "It's yours too." The lie was kind, but I didn't let myself believe it. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like a wound refusing to close. I had grown used to his distance these past weeks, his absence at dawn, his strange disappearances before nightfall. But now, seeing him standing there, pale and uncertain, I realized how much that distance had cost him too. "Finally," he said. "The council was right about one thing." The words made my stomach twist. "About what?" "Our line," he murmured. "If I fall, if eternity ends with me, Valoran's throne will crumble. Our name will fade." I swallowed. "So this is about heirs again." His gaze snapped to mine. "No. It's about legacy." He stepped closer, shadows gathering in his wake. The scent of rain and iron followed him, as familiar as heartbreak. When he stopped before me, I could feel the chill of his immortality radiating from his skin. "Seraphine," he said, and my name in his voice felt like prayer. I went to the catacombs because I sought an answer, not from my nobles, not from the dead, but from what lies older than both. "There is a way to preserve us," I frowned. "Preserve? Our bond," he clarified. "Our love, our name, all of it." He reached into his cloak and withdrew a small glass vial filled with something dark and shimmering blood that caught the firelight like garnet dust. "This," he said, "is what remains of the first king's heartblood, the one who bound himself to his mortal queen to end the first war. The rite was forbidden afterward. Too many lost themselves to it." My voice came out a whisper. "Lost themselves? How?" "They became one," he said. "Inseparable, indiscernible. Their thoughts, their essence merged, until there was no difference between king and queen, between soul and shadow." He looked down at the vial, turning it slowly between his fingers. "It is called the rite of sanguine bond. Through it, I could bind you to me not as ruler to subject, but as life to life. No grave would claim you, no age would wither you, you would walk beside me in eternity." The words fell like stones into a quiet lake, rippling through me. "Eternity," I repeated, barely breathing. "You would make me immortal." "Not immortal," he said. "Endless." I felt my throat tighten. "And if I refuse?" His jaw clenched. "Then you will die one day, and I will remain. I will live through centuries without your laughter, without your voice. The throne will outlast us both, but I—" He hesitated, the weight of emotion pulling at his composure. "I am already tired of eternity without meaning." He took my hands then, and his touch cool, steady, anchored me to the world. "Lucien," I whispered. "If I agree to this, if I take your blood into mine, would I still be me? Would I still have a soul?" His fingers tightened around mine, his voice rough with something close to anguish. "More than ever," he said, "because I would carry your soul as my heir. Every thought, every heartbeat, every kindness you would live through me, as I through you. There would be no end, only continuation. I wanted to believe him. God, I did. But I could still hear the seer's words echoing through my mind. The barren womb hides not emptiness, but destiny's seed, if the king dares to share his curse. And this was that curse. Lucien released my hand slowly, perhaps sensing the storm inside me. He turned toward the window where rain streaked the glass, distorting the reflection of his face. Do not answer now, he said quietly. When you decide, send word to me before the next full moon. The rite must be performed beneath darkness, before dawn can deny it. I nodded, unable to speak. He started to leave, then stopped at the doorway. For the first time, in weeks, he looked at me fully. The weight in his eyes was unbearable hope, fear, love, all twisted into something fragile and dangerous. If I could give you life with my hands, he said, voice trembling, I would, but all I have is blood. When he was gone, the room felt hollow. I sank back into the chair, the fire now just dying embers. The vial still gleamed where he'd placed it on the mantel, pulsing faintly as if it could hear my heartbeat answering. Would I still be me? Would he still love what remained? I didn't know. All I knew was that for the first time since the cradle burned, something within me stirred something that felt dangerously like hope. There are nights when the castle feels alive, breathing with the whispers of its walls, pulsing with the heartbeat of those who wish me gone. Tonight was one of them. Rumors had grown teeth. Every corridor echoed with laughter cut short when I entered. Every conversation turned brittle as glass. I had become the subject of 1,000 hushed conspiracies, all spoken behind jeweled fans and wine-stained lips. The king deserves an immortal queen, they murmured. The mortal one is a relic of pity and weakness. They called their treachery concern, but I knew the scent of venom when it filled a room. By the time the court assembled for the midsummer banquet, the air itself seemed sharpened. The chandeliers above the hall dripped with candlelight like frozen tears, and the scent of blood wine hung heavy. I sat at the king's right hand, the seat reserved for his consort, his wife. Yet, even from the dais, I could feel the distance yawning between us and them. Lucien was magnificent as ever, calm, precise, his expression carved from marble. The courtiers adored his restraint. I feared it. His stillness had always been his armor, and lately, he wore it even when he looked at me. The herald's voice broke through the chatter, announcing Lady Vera of House Orien, Duchess of the Silver Vale. Every immortal head turned as she entered. Lady Vera glided across the hall like a drop of spilled moonlight, her gown a ripple of silver so pale it could have been woven from frost. Her eyes, sharp and cruel, found me immediately. She smiled, the kind of smile that wounds without drawing blood. Your Majesty, she said, bowing low before Lucien, her gaze lingering on him longer than etiquette allowed. I bring gifts from the northern provinces, a token of my loyalty. Her servant stepped forward, revealing a silver cradle draped in black velvet. Inside, nestled among crimson silk, lay a single white lily, a symbol, fertility, renewal, replacement. A murmur spread through the hall like wildfire. My hands tightened around my goblet until the glass fractured. I felt the sting of blood before I even realized I'd cut myself. Lucien's head turned sharply, his voice cutting through the whispers. The court thanks you, Lady Vera. Your loyalty is noted. The words were ice. But the crowd, emboldened by Vera's insolence, continued to circle like wolves scenting weakness. Perhaps it is time Valoran had an heir born of immortal blood. Someone muttered just loud enough for me to hear. The realm grows restless. Another voice added, the king's mercy is admirable, but mercy cannot continue a dynasty. I rose before I realized I was standing. My chair scraped against marble, echoing like a strike of thunder. The music faltered. I could have shouted, I could have begged. But dignity was all I had left. I seemed to have lost my appetite, I said, my voice calm, though my pulse thundered. Enjoy the feast. Without waiting for permission, I turned and walked out. The nobles parted like reeds before me, their eyes hungry for spectacle. I gave them none. Outside, the corridors were cold and silent. My footsteps rang hollow. I walked until the noise of the banquet faded into a distant hum, until I found myself standing in the courtyard beneath the moon. The night air was sharp, scented with iron and roses. I let the quiet cut through me. And then I heard them. Voices. Lucien's low, tense, and hers. The unmistakable purr of Lady Vera. They were in the gallery above. Shadows moving against the torchlight. You humiliate yourself, she was saying. You cling to her as though pity were love. Lucien's reply came like the crack of a whip. You mistake devotion for pity, Lady Vera. Be careful which word you use in my presence. You're wasting eternity on a dying woman, Vera hissed. She will rot while you remain untouched. Do you not crave an heir born of your own blood? There was a pause, a silence so sharp I held my breath. Then Lucien's voice, low and dangerous. My heir, he said, is the woman who taught me mercy. I felt something break inside me, not from pain, but from the sudden flood of it. Love, fierce and terrible, surging like light through a cobble wound. Vera's scoff was soft, brittle. Mercy is weakness, my king. Then may I be weak forever, Lucien replied. I could imagine the look in his eyes, the same haunted tenderness that once undid me. Their voices faded after that, footsteps retreating in opposite directions. I stayed where I was, staring up at the stars barely visible beyond the high spires of Valoran Keep. The court would not forgive what he had said. His defiance had sealed our fate as surely as any curse. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest and whispered to the empty garden, You fool, you beautiful, doomed fool. Because love like ours did not end wars, it only made them inevitable. The storm came as if summoned. By dusk, thunder rolled across the mountains, shaking the stained glass moons above the keep. Lightning spilled down the spires, illuminating the court's trembling torches. The servants barred the gates, whispering prayers they didn't believe in. Somewhere deep in the halls, bells of Valoran tolled 3 times, once for life, once for death, and once for what dared to exist between. That last sound was for me. I stood before the mirror in my chamber, wrapped in a gown of pale silk that clung like a shroud. The air was heavy with rain and smoke, and beneath it I could smell the faint metallic sweetness of what was to come. The rite of sanguine bond was forbidden for mortals. I had been reminded of that 100 times. But I no longer cared for the laws of the living. When Lucien entered, the candles bowed in his presence. He had abandoned his crown again. Though tonight he looked every bit the king of death he truly was. His coat was black as obsidian, his hair unbound, and around his throat hung a single silver chain bearing an old ring, the seal of the first Blood Kings. Are you ready? He asked. I wanted to say yes, but the word stuck in my throat. He must have seen the tremor in my hands, because he stepped closer and took them gently in his. Seraphine, he murmured, this is not a command. If you wish to walk away, you may. I've walked away from life already, I said. This is only the rest of the journey. A flicker of sorrow touched his face, then pride. Then let us begin. He led me through a hidden corridor to the Hall of Binding, a chamber older than the keep itself. The walls were carved from dark stone veined with silver. In the center stood an altar draped in red silk, surrounded by hundreds of candles that burned with a steady, unnatural flame. Each one smelled faintly of iron and roses. Outside, thunder roared again. Lucien drew a dagger from his belt, a slender, curved blade, etched with runes that shimmered like living flame. He turned it toward his wrist. Blood to blood, he said softly, life to life. The blade bit deep. Crimson welled and fell in slow, perfect droplets, pooling on the altar's edge. The scent filled the air, intoxicating and terrible. My breath caught, as I watched his immortal blood smoke against the stone. Then he offered me the dagger. Your turn. My fingers didn't tremble this time. I pressed the tip against my wrist and drew it across. Pain flared, sharp and clean. My blood was warmer, more alive. It steamed faintly as it mixed with his. Lucien took my wounded hand and lifted it to his lips. Now, he whispered. Let our hearts learn the same rhythm. He pressed his wrist against mine. The contact seared. For a heartbeat, I felt nothing, then everything. The world broke open. My pulse collided with his, a clash of warmth and ice, life and death. My vision blurred as his power flooded into me like fire poured into glass. Pain lanced through my veins, exquisite and unbearable, but beneath it ecstasy. I gasped, clutching his arm as our joined blood blazed brighter than the candles. I saw visions, not memories, but echoes of eternity. Lucien standing beneath a blood-red sky, 1,000 years ago. Myself as another woman, laughing in a garden of silver trees. Then flashes of futures that had yet to come, children of shadow and light running through halls bathed in dawn. A city rebuilt beneath eternal night. My knees gave way. Lucian caught me, his arms steady even as the storm outside split the sky in two. "Breathe," he said, though I couldn't. My chest refused to rise. My heart convulsed, then slowed, slower, slower until silence claimed it. I remember his cry, sharp as breaking stone. He pressed his mouth to mine, forcing his blood between my lips. It burned like liquid moonlight, like sorrow given form. "Come back," he whispered against my mouth. "Don't leave me in eternity alone." The warmth of him filled me again, spreading from my tongue to my throat to my heart. My lungs seized once, twice, and then, impossibly, drew breath. The world flooded back in color. My eyes opened to his face above me, fierce, terrified, utterly beautiful. For a single perfect instant, I heard both our hearts beating together, the same rhythm, the same sound. Then nothing. The rhythm vanished. No pulse, no breath, just stillness. And yet I lived. Lucian's hand brushed my cheek, trembling. "It's done," he murmured. "You are mine, and I am yours. Between us, there is no end." Outside, the storm broke in full, thunder shattering across the sky. The candles flared crimson, their flames bending toward us, as if to witness the moment the mortal queen and the eternal king became something else entirely. Our hearts, once separate, had found each other only to fall silent, forever beating as one, and never again alone. When I opened my eyes, the world was silent, so silent, I thought I had died. For a moment, I couldn't feel my body. There was no heartbeat, no breath, only stillness stretching into eternity. Then, like the first tremor of dawn after endless night, sound returned, soft, delicate, unfamiliar, the whisper of candle flames, the rustle of cloth. And beneath it all, something stranger, 1,000 faint pulses thrumming through stone and air and flesh, all beating in slow, deliberate rhythm. I sat up. The room tilted, washed in color that shimmered too vividly to be real. Every surface glowed faintly. Every heartbeat in the castle echoed through my skull like music played on distant drums. My hands trembled in front of me, pale, luminous, the veins beneath my skin no longer blue, but silver. It was morning. Pale light filtered through the stained glass moons, soft and fractured, scattering red and violet across the marble floor. But the light didn't hurt my eyes. It didn't burn. It bowed. Lucian was there, seated beside the bed. His shirt was undone at the throat, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. Relief and exhaustion warred across his face. When our eyes met, he exhaled as though he'd been holding that breath for centuries. "You're awake," he whispered. My voice was a rasp. "Am I?" He smiled faintly. In a manner of speaking. He rose and reached for me, but hesitated like a man afraid of touching a dream. I took his hand first. It was cool as always, yet the cold no longer bit me. It felt natural, familiar. "What happened?" I asked. "I remember fire, and then nothing." "The right nearly took you," he said. "Your heart stopped for 3 minutes, I thought." His voice broke, just once. I thought eternity had failed me. I should have wept at his words, but tears no longer came easily. Instead, I felt a strange, detached calm, like grief seen through glass. I turned my palm upward, studying it. The candlelight traced silver paths along my veins, tiny rivers of moonlight flowing under my skin. "I don't feel human," I whispered. "You're not," Lucian said softly. "Not entirely." He drew me to my feet. My balance faltered at first, but when his arm circled my waist, strength surged through me. Every nerve felt sharpened. I could sense the world breathing, the hum of life in the walls, the faint heartbeats of guards 2 halls away, even the flicker of Lucian's pulse, slow and deliberate, like thunder far beneath the earth. "Your heart," I murmured. "It beats with mine." He nodded. "We are bound. When you breathe, I breathe. When I die, you die. When I command—" He hesitated, meeting my gaze. You could command me just as easily. The words struck through me like lightning. Equal, I breathed. He smiled, but there was both pride and fear in it. In every sense. We stepped into the corridor. The storm had passed, but the castle remained wrapped in twilight. Servants lined the hall, kneeling as we walked by. Their eyes darted between awe and terror. I could feel their pulses flutter, could taste the iron tang of fear on the air like perfume. Rise, I said. They obeyed instantly, not out of courtesy, but compulsion. Lucien's glance flickered toward me, wary, admiring. You see? He said quietly. Already the blood answers you. The throne hall awaited us, its doors thrown open. Inside, the nobles gathered like carrion crows, their whispers dying as I entered. Lady Vera stood at the forefront, face pale as bone. When she bowed, when they all did, the sound of 100 hearts kneeling filled the air. My voice came without effort. You kneel before your queen. The echo of power threaded through the room, invisible but undeniable. Even Lucien seemed to stand taller beside me, as though my strength amplified his own. But then, something strange caught my eye. At the far end of the hall, a mirror hung between the twin thrones. For a heartbeat, I saw myself clearly, a woman, pale but radiant, eyes alive with light. Then the image flickered. My reflection vanished entirely, replaced by an empty void rimmed in silver flame. I stumbled. Lucien was at my side before anyone else could move. What is it? He whispered. The mirror, I breathed. I saw nothing, no reflection. He touched my cheek, forcing me to look at him instead. Then the mirror is wrong, he said. You are here. But the unease wouldn't leave me. I could feel something vast stirring inside me, a cold, patient awareness, not entirely my own. Every heartbeat I heard in others made the silence of my own body more deafening. When the audience was dismissed, I lingered by the stained glass alone. The colors danced across my skin, brighter than they'd ever been. My senses drank everything, the faint hum of blood in stone, the whisper of wings outside, even the echo of eternity running through the castle walls. For the first time in years, I felt alive. And yet, beneath that vibrant pulse of new power, I could feel something else, something colder, quieter, spreading like frost across my soul. I touched my chest, searching for the heartbeat that once defined me. There was nothing. Only silence that seemed to breathe back. Alive, but not living. Eternal, but never warm again. The queen had been reborn, but I wasn't sure what of Seraphine de Lior remained. At first, I thought the ache in my throat was grief. It began as a whisper, an irritation at the back of my tongue, a dryness I could not quench no matter how much water I drank. Then it grew, spreading through my chest like slow fire, until every breath I took felt like inhaling smoke. I told myself it was fatigue. I told myself it was fear. But when I caught the faintest trace of blood in the air, a servant cutting his palm while polishing silver, I felt something deep and monstrous stir. The scent was intoxicating. My mouth filled with longing I didn't understand, and before I could stop myself, my fangs, the ones I didn't have days ago, slid down with a soft, traitorous click. That was the night I locked myself away from the world. Lucien found me hours later, sitting on the cold marble floor of my chamber, trembling, and horrified at what I'd become. His silhouette filled the doorway, tall and still, framed by the dying fire. "You've been starving yourself," he said quietly. "I'm not hungry," I lied. He stepped closer, his presence wrapping around me like a shadow. "You are, I can hear it. The rhythm of your hunger has its own pulse now." "Then you should stay away," I said, my voice raw. "Before I forget who I am." He knelt before me, his expression unreadable but his eyes tender. "You forget nothing, Seraphine. Hunger does not erase love, it only sharpens it." When he reached for my hand, I flinched. "Lucien, please." He lifted my chin gently, his voice a whisper. "Let me teach you." I wanted to protest, to flee, but he drew my wrist to his lips and kissed it once, reverently. "The first lesson," he murmured, "is restraint." Then he pressed his wrist against mine. The scent of him flooded me, iron and warmth, darkness and life all at once. My fangs throbbed. The fire in my throat roared, begging. And then, as if guided by instinct older than language, I sank my teeth into his skin. The taste, gods. The taste was not what I expected. It was not violence or sin. It was light. It was the memory of laughter, the weight of his sorrow, the echo of every century he had endured alone. I drank until the world turned molten and my body trembled with terrible, blissful relief. Lucien's voice broke through the haze. Enough. His hand cupped the back of my neck, steady but not cruel. When I pulled away, his blood streaked my lips. He smiled faintly, thumb brushing the corner of my mouth. You see? Even hunger can be tender. Shame flooded me, followed quickly by something softer, trust, perhaps, or surrender. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't, he said. You fed. There's a difference. That night, we learned each other anew through restraint, through surrender, through the ache that refused to fade. The hunger became something sacred between us, something that no mortal tongue could name. But the court was not blind. 3 nights later, when I entered the Hall of Moons for counsel, I felt the shift immediately. Whispers froze mid-breath. The nobles stared with thinly veiled disdain, their envy slick as oil. And then the pain struck sharp, searing, crawling beneath my skin. I gasped, clutching my side. A faint smoke rose from my gown. Blessed silver. Someone had laced it into the seams. I tore the fabric open, hissing as the metal scorched my flesh. Lucien was beside me in a blink, his power surging through the room like a storm. Who dares? His voice was thunder, ancient and furious. No one spoke. But I saw their fear and beneath it, their disbelief. Because even as the silver burned me, the wounds began to close. The skin knit itself together, pale and unblemished within seconds. Lucien turned to me, astonished. Seraphine. I stood, shaky but unbroken. The nobles fell back instinctively, as though they sensed something greater had awakened. I reached for the nearest shard of silver and pressed it to my palm. It sizzled, hissed, and went dark. The mark it left was faint, almost like frost instead of fire. I don't burn, I said quietly. Lucien's expression was awe, tinged with something like fear. No, you don't. The room seemed to hold its breath. The blessed weapon, forged to kill the damned, had failed. Whatever I was, it was not blasphemy, it was something beyond it. As we left the hall, I felt it fully for the first time. The hum beneath my skin, the pulse that wasn't heartbeat but presence. My senses sharpened again, not wild like before but aware. I could hear every thought in the room behind me, their doubt, their dread, their envy. I wasn't cursed, I was new. The hunger still lived inside me. Yes, but it no longer ruled me. It whispered, it waited, and I could answer it with choice. Later that night, as I lay beside Lucien, his fingers tracing idle patterns across my wrist, I finally understood what he had meant. Love wasn't the absence of hunger. It was learning how to live with it, how to feed without consuming, how to burn without ash. The court would call me monster. The priests would call me heretic. But I knew the truth now. I wasn't the end of something old. I was the beginning of something greater. It began with whispers, as all revolutions do. The nobles spoke in honeyed voices during the day, and sharpened their daggers by moonlight. They called me unnatural, the mortal who had stolen eternity, the queen who had tainted pure blood with the warmth of life. I heard their plotting long before they believed I could. Every heartbeat that quickened in deceit, every pulse that fluttered at the thought of rebellion. Their fear was loud. But fear, when left unchecked, becomes courage in the wrong hands. By the time Lucien sensed it, the castle had already become a battlefield. The siege began at twilight. Holy fire arced across the sky like comets, crashing into the ramparts. The air thickened with ash and the stench of burning oil. From the high balcony of the Crimson Court, I watched the gates of Valoran burn, torches raised by the very nobles who once bowed before us. Lucien stood beside me, sword drawn, the firelight catching the silver edge of his blade. They'll destroy themselves, he said quietly. They'll destroy you, I answered. And me. And everything that still remembers mercy. A blast shook the western walls. Screams echoed from the courtyards. Below, our loyal guards, half mortal, half turned, fought against an ocean of fanatics chanting prayers to the old gods. Their voices struck me like needles through the heart. Burn the false queen. Burn the half-born. Lucien turned to me, eyes dark and unreadable. Stay inside, if I fall. Don't, I snapped. Don't finish that sentence. He smiled faintly, the way he always did before stepping into danger. Then fight with me. We descended together into the chaos. The great hall had become a slaughterhouse of marble and blood. Broken columns lay scattered across the floor. The stained glass moons shattered into jeweled shards. Flames licked the draperies, devouring centuries of beauty. In the midst of it, I saw them, the rebels. The same nobles who once kissed my hand now raised blessed spears against me. Lady Vera led them, clad in armor, gilded with holy sigils. Her voice carried above the roar. The queen is not of us. She is blasphemy made flesh. I felt the crowd's fury crash like a tide, and beneath it, something else stirring within me. The hunger, it whispered. Let me show them what blasphemy can do. Lucien moved first, his blade flashing through the smoke, but even he was outnumbered. For every foe he struck down, 2 more rose from the fire. They bore relics and prayers, weapons sanctified to wound the undead. I ran to his side, my hand slick with blood that wasn't my own. Lucien, he turned too late. A spear tipped with blessed silver drove through his shoulder, the runes blazing with holy light. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. He staggered but did not fall. I caught him. The fire from the wound searing my palms. Something inside me broke. I screamed and the castle answered. The air split open with sound, like thunder pulled from the throat of God. The candles guttered out, shadows thickened, and a pulse unlike any heartbeat rippled through the hall. My vision bled white. When I looked down, my blood was spilling from my hands, not red, but silver. It fell onto the stones, spreading in lines that glowed like veins of light. The rebels froze, staring as the glow crawled across the floor, touching the wounded where they lay. The moment my blood reached them, the flames that burned their skin went out. Their screams turned to gasps of shock. The light seeped into them, not as fire, but as warmth. One of the oldest vampires, a counselor who had not felt his own heartbeat in 5 centuries, clutched his chest and sobbed. I can feel it, he whispered. I can feel it again. The rebels recoiled in terror. Witchcraft, Vera shouted. She's corrupting us all. No, I said, rising. My voice shook the stones. I'm restoring you. I reached for the spear still lodged in Lucien's shoulder and pulled it free. The blessed silver hissed in my grip, but instead of burning, it cooled. The sigils dimmed, surrendering to the same light that lived in my blood. Lucien stared at me, breathless. Seraphine. I cupped his face. You once told me our legacy could live in eternity. You were wrong. He frowned faintly, dazed. Wrong? Our legacy isn't eternal, I said softly. It's alive. The next moment, I turned toward the rebels. The power moved through me like a storm breaking free of chains. Silver light burst from my palms, scattering the holy flames, unraveling their prayers midair. The banners burned away, the sigils melted from their armor, and the sound of 100 hearts beating filled the hall. Even Vera fell to her knees, her defiance shattering into tears as the light touched her. What are you? She whispered. I looked down at my blood-streaked hands, the glow fading slowly to gold. Not cursed, I said, not damned. Lucien's arm slid around my shoulders, steady though he still bled. His voice was hoarse but full of awe. Then what are you? I smiled faintly. Evolution. Outside, the dawn broke for the first time in years over Valoran Keep. It touched the walls without burning them. It kissed the faces of vampires who once hid from its light, their eyes wide in wonder. The cradle I could never fill with life, I filled instead with transformation. The blood that had once been my burden became my gift, and the world, for the first time, began to breathe again. The dawn that rose after the battle should have felt like victory. The fire was gone, the rebellion silenced. The court that once cursed my name now knelt in reverence, their eyes wide as they felt warmth in their dead veins for the first time in centuries. They called me Saint of Blood, Mother of Dawn, Queen of Renewal. Titles meant to honor, but all I could feel was the slow unraveling inside me. I could sense it in every heartbeat I heard. The sound of their lives growing louder, while mine dimmed. The first sign came that morning. I reached for the sunlight spilling through the shattered windows, curious, unafraid. It no longer burned me, but when it touched my fingers, I felt the faint sting of something heavier than pain. My skin shimmered, not in light, but in stone. Marble veins crept across my hand, pale as frost, beautiful and horrifying. I gasped and stumbled back into the shadow. The transformation stopped, but the weight of it remained beneath, my skin waiting. Lucien found me moments later. He reached for my hand, saw what lingered there, and his breath caught like a blade between us. "It's begun," I whispered. He said nothing, only gathered me into his arms, as though holding me tighter could keep the inevitable away. But eternity always demands its due. By nightfall, the change had spread to my arm. The marble shimmered faintly beneath the skin, tracing delicate lines of silver white, as if the gods themselves were sculpting me from within. I could still move, still breathe, but every hour, I grew heavier, slower, colder. Lucien refused to leave my side. He had forbidden the court to enter the throne hall, claiming I needed rest, but I could hear them whisper beyond the doors, wondering if the Queen of Dawn was dying after all. "Perhaps this is the cost," I said softly as he poured another goblet of blood I could no longer bring myself to drink. He set it aside. "There must be another way." "Lucien," I said gently, "you of all people know immortality isn't free." His jaw tightened. "I won't watch you turn to stone. I won't lose you to this." I tried to smile. "You won't lose me. I'll just slow down." But even as I spoke, my reflection in the goblet's surface flickered my face, fractured by tiny veins of crystal. I was running out of time. At his command, the seer Heir was summoned. She arrived cloaked and silent, her eyes ancient as the night itself. When she looked at me, she didn't bow, only sighed, as though she'd already known what awaited me. "You warned me," I murmured. "I warned you that creation through sacrifice leaves scars," she replied. "But you've done more than survive. You've changed the balance." Lucien's voice was sharp, desperate. "Then tell me how to undo it." Heir turned to him slowly. "Undo? No, my king. You cannot unmake light once it has been born in darkness." Her gaze found me again. "To give life, she must sleep through time." I frowned. "Sleep?" "The eternal slumber," Heir said. "Your body is not dying, Seraphine, it is sealing. You've given too much of your essence to the living. Your spirit must retreat, rest, or the gift you've given will collapse upon itself." Lucien's voice trembled. "And if she refuses, then her soul will scatter. Her body will remain as stone, hollow and dead. But if she accepts, she will endure, waiting for the world to become what she dreamed of." My throat ached. "And when would that be?" "When light and shadow can walk the same path without fear," Heir said. "When the world remembers balance." The silence that followed was unbearable. Lucien's hand found mine, trembling though he tried to hide it. "How long?" he asked. "Centuries," the seer said softly. "Perhaps more. But she will wake." Lucien bowed his head. "Then I will wait." Heir's voice gentled. "Eternity was never meant for waiting." "Then it will learn," he answered, and his words carried the weight of a vow. That night, he carried me to the inner sanctum beneath the throne hall. The chamber glowed faintly with the same light that had saved our people, the silver fire of the blood that had once bound us. Each step felt heavier than the last. My body was already half marble, but my heart still beat, faint and stubborn. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "No," I whispered. "Just sad I won't see the world we built." He cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing the faint line where skin turned to stone. "You'll see it. I'll make sure of it." I smiled weakly. "And you?" He hesitated. "I will remain." "You'll grow weary," I said. "Even kings can't outlast time." He kissed my brow. "Then let time break me before it touches you." When I lay upon the altar, the marble beneath me was warm. The air shimmered with silver light, wrapping around my limbs like a lullaby. My eyes grew heavy as the last of my humanity ebbed away. Lucien's face hovered above mine, ageless, resolute, his tears glimmering like stars. "I'll guard you until the dawn you dreamed of," he swore. I wanted to answer, to tell him I loved him beyond the boundaries of flesh and time, but my lips no longer moved. The light consumed me whole. The last thing I heard before sleep claimed me was his voice. breaking softly against eternity. Rest now, my heart. I'll keep the world safe until you wake. They say eternity is silence, but they are wrong. Eternity is echoes. The world never truly quieted after I closed my eyes. Even in the depth of my slumber, I could still hear the hum of time sliding past me like water over stone, the sigh of generations rising and falling in rhythm with a single sound that tethered me to life. Lucien's voice. He spoke to me every dawn, every dusk, every century. I do not dream, not in the mortal sense. My consciousness floats between shadow and silver, half aware of the world's pulse through the marble that encases me. The stone has memory. It remembers his touch, the weight of his hand resting on mine. Through it, I feel him live, and slowly, I feel him change. The first century passed like a heartbeat. Lucien rebuilt Valoran, keep from ashes, reshaping it into a sanctuary where creatures of night could walk without fear of light. My chamber became the heart of it, a sanctum sealed by blood and vow. No mortal entered. Only he. The people called me the Sleeping Queen. The one who had given her life to heal the cursed. Pilgrims came to lay offerings by the sealed gates, silver lilies, songs written on parchment, vials of blood meant as tribute. None knew I could hear the faint murmur of their prayers, echoing through the stone like distant rain. Every 100 years, when the world tilted closer to remembrance, my heart beat once enough to remind him I was still there. Each time, Lucien fell to his knees beside me, tears staining the marble. I hear you, he would whisper. Just one more century, my love. Just one more. By the second century, the world had changed. Kingdoms had crumbled. The banners of Valoran no longer fluttered in the wind, but its legends did. They said my blood had turned monsters into men, that my heart still beat once every 100 years to bless the children born of shadow. Some called me goddess, others curse, but none dared to break the seal. Lucien remained. Always. He stopped wearing his crown. He no longer ruled. The court had faded, replaced by an order of keepers, devoted only to guarding the queen's tomb. I felt them come and go, mortals, vampires, hybrids of both sworn to silence, bound by reverence. But Lucien stayed unchanged, until he didn't. The 4th century brought whispers of his weakness. I felt at first a dull ache through the bond that tethered us. The marble pulsed faintly, echoing with the rhythm of a slowing heart. My heart. His. They were still one. He came to me one night, his steps slower, his breath heavier than it should have been. I could sense the warmth in him, warmth that should not have belonged to a vampire. I think your gift has reached me, he said softly. His hand rested against my stone cheek. I could not see him, but I felt the tremor in his touch. Your blood runs through the world now, he murmured. Through me, through all that lives. I feel the sun on my skin and it doesn't burn. I feel hunger and I feel peace. He laughed then, low and weary. It seems your curse was never for you, my queen. It was for me to learn what living truly meant. He wrote more often after that. I heard the scratch of his quill in the quiet hours when the world slept. His journals filled the chamber beside mine, hundreds of volumes chronicling the centuries we'd endured apart. One entry, I still remember, as if etched into my soul. Eternity is not endless, life. It is endless love. And love, by its very nature, must ache. By the 7th century, he began to fade. Slowly, gracefully, like twilight surrendering to dawn. The gift I had unleashed upon the world was reclaiming him, softening his immortality into something gentler, something human. He would sleep now, sometimes for days, sometimes for months, his head resting beside my tomb, his fingers laced through the marble cracks, as though to remind me he was still near. When he woke, his voice was weaker, but his words never changed. I'm still here, he'd whisper. I promised. I wanted to answer him. Sometimes, I tried. My voice would shatter against the weight of the spell, but the bond between us carried something deeper than sound. He always seemed to sense it. Yes, he'd murmur. I hear you too. 1,000 years passed. The world beyond the walls became unrecognizable. The old faiths died, new empires rose, machines breathed smoke into the sky, and humans learned to cage the sun itself. Through it all, Valoran remained a ruin to some, a miracle to others. And within it, Lucien Dravien, the eternal king, sat beside a marble statue that once had been his heart. He had grown frail. His hair, once gold, now silver-white. His eyes still glowed faintly with the memory of immortality. The keepers who guarded him called him the last immortal, but he always shook his head. No, he would tell them, voice fragile but certain. There is one more, and when she wakes, the world will finally remember how to love what it fears. The night he wrote his final entry, I felt the quill stop. The bond pulsed once his heart, my heart, and then silence followed. And yet, as the stars turned above Valoran, I felt warmth seep through the marble once more. It wasn't grief. It was him, his love, his devotion, his centuries of waiting, folding into me like a breath across time. Eternity, I realized, was not the absence of endings. It was the, quote, promise that love endures, even when everything else forgets. The first thing I heard was birds. Not the shrieking crows that once haunted the towers of Valoran, but a melody soft and foreign, echoing through broken stone and sunlight. Then came warmth, a steady golden heat pressing against my skin. It didn't burn. It caressed. I drew a breath. It was the first in 1,000 years. The air was thick with life-damp moss, ivy, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers reclaiming the ruins. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me was no longer carved marble, but glass shattered by vines, sunlight filtering through like spilled honey. The world had changed. My tomb, once sealed beneath shadow, now lay open to the day. The spell had cracked at last. The marble that had held me was fractured and veined with green. Nature had claimed Valoran Keep, wrapping its heart in quiet forgiveness. And beside me, where no time could ever reach, he Saturday Lucien. His hair was white now, his face weathered, his hands trembling where they rested upon his knees. But I would have known him anywhere. Even after 1,000 years, his soul sang to mine faint but unmistakable. The bond between us still thrummed, soft as a heartbeat in the distance. For a long time, I simply stared, afraid that if I spoke, the dream would shatter. Then he stirred. Slowly, as if he had been waiting for this moment all his life. "Seraphine," he whispered. His voice was human rough, mortal, but laced with wonder. "Lucien?" My lips barely formed the word. My voice, unused for centuries, came out like wind through hollow stone. "You waited." He smiled. "I told you I would." He reached for me, his hand shaking, skin thin as parchment. When his fingers brushed my cheek, I felt the frailty of mortality in him, the warmth of blood that flowed slow and tired. He was no longer the king who ruled the night. He was simply a man. "How long?" I asked softly. "Too long," he murmured, and the corners of his mouth lifted faintly. "Long enough to see the world remember what you taught it." I looked beyond him then, and my breath caught. Where once had been endless dark forest, sunlight now touched every leaf. Cities glimmered in the valley below, alive with both day and night creatures of shadow and light walking side by side beneath a sky neither feared. The world had healed. The night and day finally share the same sky, I said, barely breathing. He nodded. "Your gift spread, just as Iron foretold. The blood you shed became the world's heartbeat. Vampires no longer hide from the dawn. Mortals no longer hunt the dark. They built a world in your image." I felt tears rise, hot and heavy, unfamiliar after centuries of stillness. "And you watched it all?" "I did," he said, "for as long as I could." His hand fell from my cheek. I caught it instinctively. It was light, so light I could feel his pulse weakening with every word. "Lucien," I whispered. "Don't," he smiled faintly. "Even eternity runs out when it's lived properly." "Please," he shushed me gently, thumb brushing my wrist. "You gave me what no heir ever could." His eyes, dim but steadfast, found mine. Time worth living. I bowed my head, pressing my forehead against his. "You were supposed to see this world with me." "I have," he murmured. "Through you. Through everything you became." His breath faltered. The hand in mine loosened, but the bond between us pulsed once strong, steady, like the last echo of a promise fulfilled. I felt it then, his heart slowing, then stilling. His last exhale brushed my cheek like a sigh carried by centuries. The silence that followed was not grief, it was peace. I held him as the sun rose higher, flooding the chamber with gold. The ivy trembled in the wind. The glass above scattered the light across his face. And for one impossible moment, he looked young again, the king I had loved, the man who had waited through time. When the first sunbeam touched my arm, I did not flinch. The marble in my skin shimmered once, then dissolved, leaving only warmth behind. The curse had ended. The bond that once tied us to darkness had finally let us step into dawn. I laid him gently upon the altar where I had once slept and pressed a kiss to his brow. "Rest now," I whispered. "You've earned your eternity." Then, for the first time since becoming queen of the night, I turned toward the open world. The sunlight met me not as an enemy, but as a long-lost friend. It wrapped around me like Lucien's embrace, soft and forgiving. I stepped forward barefoot, the marble floor cool beneath me, the scent of morning and ash mingling in the air. When I crossed the threshold, the world seemed to hold its breath. The light kissed my face. Tears welled and fell, glimmering red like rubies in the dawn. And as they touched the earth, flowers bloomed white and crimson, blood and purity entwined. I closed my eyes, hearing the echo of his voice one last time in the wind. Eternity is not endless life, it is endless love. He had been right. He gave me eternity, but I chose to spend it remembering the life we built, the legacy of love that outlived immortality.